Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, the new Syrian regime cracks down on the Alawite population, leaving thousands dead. Israel increases the pressure on Hamas and prepares for more strikes in Gaza, plus a closer look at the plight of minorities in Syria and at new legislation proposed in the Knesset to establish Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. This week in Jerusalem, you never know who you might run into, Superman or Cinderella or a little Queen Esther. Jewish people around the world are celebrating Purim, the holiday commemorating the deliverance of the Jewish people from a plot to destroy them. At the Western Wall and in synagogues, the biblical book of Esther is read from a scroll. The Bible says Haman, a wicked advisor to King Ahasuerus, conspired to kill all the Jews throughout the ancient kingdom of Persia on one day. But Queen Esther, who unknown to the king was Jewish, worked with her cousin Mordecai to expose the plot and turn the tables on Haman. So the Jews were victorious over their enemies, and that's what they celebrate at Purim. Speaking of protecting the Jewish people, last night Israeli Air Force fighter jets struck targets in southern Syria, mainly radars and detection assets used for aerial intelligence. Additionally, they struck command positions, military sites, and weapons depots belonging to the Syrian regime. The presence of these assets posed a threat to Israel and IDF operations. The strikes aimed to neutralize future threats. According to local sources, there were 41 strikes in total. In other news, Israel is ramping up pressure on Hamas to release the remaining hostages. They're cutting off electricity to Gaza and making plans to resume the fighting. Meanwhile, in Syria, human rights groups accuse the new regime of a massacre. Thousands of people have been killed in recent days. Here's the latest. The new Islamist government in Syria says its brutal crackdown on the Alawite community is a response to a rising rebellion of supporters of the deposed Assad regime. They claim those rebels carried out attacks against forces of the new government last week.
We will not tolerate the remnants of Assad who have committed crimes against our army forces and state institutions.
But others say the Sunni forces of President Al-Sharaa, also known as Julani, massacred the Alawites. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said on Saturday more than 1,000 people, mostly Alawite civilians, had been killed. Charmaine Hedding of the Shai Fund has been helping refugees and persecuted Christians in the Middle East for years. She says people on the ground tell her the numbers are higher.
We're hearing reports of 2,000 to 3,000, and it's increasing every couple of hours. And we're seeing images and speaking to people on the ground that are just saying the bodies are piled up in the streets.
In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemned what he called radical Islamist terrorists who murdered people in recent days, saying the U.S. stands with ethnic minorities, including Christian, Druze, Alawite, and Kurdish communities. As trouble mounts for its northern neighbor, Israel is increasing the pressure on Hamas to release the remaining 59 hostages. It's cut off electricity it supplies to Gaza and is considering cutting off water. Also, the IDF is drawing up new war plans if Hamas doesn't free the hostages, lay down its arms, and give up governing in Gaza.
We will employ all the tools available to us so that all the hostages will return, and we will ensure that Hamas won't be in Gaza on the day after.
The U.S. has been dealing directly with the terror group to free the last living American hostage and all the hostages. U.S. negotiator Adam Bowler said he allayed Israel's concerns over those talks in a conversation with Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs.
I think I was able to put him at ease, that I wasn't going to go off the rails, that it would be parameters that we would work on together.
Meanwhile, Iran is refusing to negotiate with the U.S. about halting its rush to develop nuclear weapons.
Some bullying governments insist on negotiations. Their negotiation is not aimed at resolving issues. They negotiate to dictate their will.
President Trump wrote Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei about the White House desire to strike a deal rather than attack Iran militarily to derail its nuclear ambitions.
I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
In a move to establish control over Syria, the new Syrian Islamist government has killed thousands of Alawite civilians in their villages and homes. The Alawite sect is the ethno-religious group of the deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad. Charmaine Hedding, who heads up the Shai Fund, works with multiple ethnic minorities in Syria, offering humanitarian aid. Here's her take on the latest killings and how they could be affecting the Christian community. What's the state of the Christians there?
Well, the Christian community is interspersed within all of these communities, including a significant number along this coastal plain region where the Alawites live. And I've spoken to many of the Christians in this area, and they are experiencing this random looting, shooting, and executions in exactly the same way as the Alawites have been. So this is a Sunni, which Jelani is a Sunni. These are his groups, his government-controlled groups that are committing these ethno-religious genocidal acts, very much like we saw with ISIS, which was also Sunni, against other ethnic religious minorities.
And how should the world be responding to this? I mean, it's kind of been under the radar to a certain extent.
Under the radar in most places except Israel. Israel has been strikingly on this from the very beginning when Jelani or Al-Sharaa took over Syria. They have called him out for being the terrorist that he is. He was part of the Jabhat al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda group in Syria. He had a $10 million bounty on his head for killing many ethno-religious minorities across Iraq and Syria and Americans. So I think the international response, including Marco Rubio just in the last day, has been really strong, coming against these jihadi militias and terrorists. Israel's been very strong, but unfortunately there are some countries that have been naive and have embraced this new self-made regime. Remember, Jelani has dismissed the constitution, so he's a dictator. And a Sunni one with Al-Qaeda background.
And you were mentioning that you had actually been in touch with one Alawite family.
Yeah, I've been in touch with Christians and Alawite families in the last 48 hours, and they've all told me the same thing. One of them said to me there were Sunni terrorists that came in from Idlib. Idlib is the area that Jelani used to manage, backed by Turkey. So these Turkish terrorist-backed terrorists came in under Jelani's control. They mobilized and they rode in on motorbikes or walked in, and they just started shooting anyone who wasn't Sunni. I mean, and going into their homes, shooting people. They said it was totally random if you survived or not. But the worst is the targeted killings, the going into the homes of anyone who's not a Sunni aligned with HDS or Jelani's group, that they've gone in and executed them. They took out the men from their homes and executed them outside of their homes. This is ISIS-style terrorism that we're seeing.
Yeah. Now, you've been working with refugees and with persecuted Christians in the Middle East for many, many years. And I understand you've just sent some aid.
Yes, we're very excited to announce that we've just sent an airlift of aid into northeast Syria, where we are supporting all of the ethnic religious minorities in Syria that are being terrorized by these Turkish-backed and Jelani-backed terrorist groups. So we're supporting them. The aid has been significant amounts of medicine, and we're also working out on how to help people that have escaped. So many people, because they were going from house to house killing people, have escaped into the desert or into the fields, and so we're trying to help those that are in hiding.
Yeah, and Israel has also offered help to the Druze particularly. Well, what else is Israel doing?
Israel's been really strong in helping with humanitarian aid, and they've been very outspoken about their support to northeast Syria, which is under the Christian, Kurdish, Druze and Arab tribes, but it's a semi-autonomous region that actually does practice good governance and inclusiveness for all religious minorities, and of course the Druze. And we've seen trucks of aid going up from Israel into the Druze areas in support of them. So Israel's been very strong, like Marco Rubio has been, on protecting the religious minorities and making sure that this mosaic that makes up Syria is not ending up being another ISIS caliphate or Sunni caliphate.
Charmaine Hedding has been working with vulnerable people groups in the Middle East for years. To learn more about the Shai Fund and its work with religious minorities, go to theshaifund.org. It's delivering humanitarian aid right now to vulnerable ethnic populations and helping refugees who've had to flee their homes for their lives. Besides the literal carnage that happened on October 7th, there are those who say something else died in Israel that day. Any lingering hopes that a two-state solution could work. Our bureau chief, Chris Mitchell, spoke with someone taking action in the Knesset to bring about Israeli sovereignty in the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, areas some call the West Bank.
Member of Knesset, Ohad, great to be with you. Tell us about what you're doing, you're proposing in the Knesset right now.
Right. About a week and a half ago, I introduced a new bill in the Knesset, which I think is a historic bill to apply Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I think the time has come, after so many years of trying to divide God's land and to give pieces of our land to the Arabs, hoping that that will achieve peace and bring us the stability and prosperity that we were promised. And after we've time and time again, we've saw that it failed. Now the time has come to actually implement God's policies in Israel, and that is to apply Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I think that's the only solution that would truly bring peace, stability, and prosperity.
What kind of support are you getting in the Knesset?
So I think there's a lot of people, not just in the Knesset. Actually, there's a vast majority in the Israeli public who understand that the time has come for that. After October 7th, everybody understands that the two-state solution has failed miserably. Trying to give pieces of our land to the Arabs didn't brought all those things that we were promised. And not only that they didn't do that, it brought the opposite, only death and bloodshed and agony to everybody. Today, everybody is suffering. The Palestinians in Gaza are suffering. The Israelis are suffering. The Middle East is being bothered, and the whole world, and America, everybody is being bothered by the endless cycle of violence between the Israelis and the Arabs. We had 68 members of the Knesset saying that we need to take away the two-state solution and to implement new ideas of what to do with Judea and Samaria. And now my bill, now the time has come for this bill to go through, and I think it will get wide support in Israel.
In the Trump administration, do you see that President Trump and the White House would stand behind a bill like yours to declare sovereignty of Judea and Samaria?
This is what we are hoping to see. And we are hoping and we are praying, and we have good reasons also to believe that we will see support coming from the president to this approach, as he himself suggested to remove the Gazans out of Gaza, which is a very logical solution to this endless conflict with these radical terrorists coming out of Gaza. President Trump comes with a common sense policies, and we are seeing it, and I am sure that he will also support the implementation of Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. It will solve the problem instead of keeping it there and only fooling ourselves that we can control the level of flames. It's not working. The time has come to remove the Gazans out of there. All these countries who said that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, Ireland, for example, Canada, all these countries who supposedly support the Palestinians so much, well, then they should accept them.
And tell us where your bill is now and where you expect it to go next.
So it's actually the beginning of the process. This process can take several months, and of course, as much as if we will be able to reach understandings with the Trump administration it will definitely help.
A major thought leader from America visited our studio recently and also weighed in on the issue of sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. He believes it's the only way Israel can prevent an endless war right in its heartland. Our correspondent Paul Strand found out why in this discussion with Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council.
Tony, I think if one thing has become clear, it's this idea that the West so holds on to of a two-state solution, that Israel and Palestine, they just have to make peace. There has to be a Palestine right next door to Israel. That seems like the only way to peace. As you have come here now and you're visiting, what do you think the sense of that is among the Israeli people, among Israeli leaders?
I think the polling data shows this, conversations show this, that idea it can no longer be tolerated given what happened on October 7, 2023. And when you consider the fact that Gaza, the strip of land in the southern part of Israel, you look at Judea and Samaria, that's 24 times larger than Gaza. And the inability to protect Israel from Gaza, when you look at the fact that Judea and Samaria is in the heartland, literally in the middle of the geographical state of Israel, it's indefensible. Yeah. So I think it's clear here. Now it's just a part of educating the rest of the world.
One of the things is a lot of power has been given to Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and we have seen a lot of violence coming out of there. Like right now, there's a lot of Israeli troops in there fighting, and they're fighting Hamas. The Palestinian Authority may have some sort of power, but it seems like Hamas is what the people want there. Do you think that eventually Judea and Samaria just have to come under Israeli sovereignty?
Well, I think there's a couple of aspects to that, Paul, that need to be considered. Number one is that from a security standpoint, absolutely. There is an increase in smuggling of arms coming into Judea and Samaria, advanced weaponry, rocket launchers and others coming into that area. So that's why you see a more active move of IDF troops in Judea and Samaria. But secondly, if we know that Iran is behind this destabilization and this push, I think a good step forward would be the declaration of sovereignty over this region, because then it will show that Iran, that initiated this through their proxies, actually lost, not just got beat in battle where they can come back and fight another day, but they lost what they were fighting for, and that was to push the Jewish people out of their ancestral homeland.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a chance, speaking of Iran, that the world could finally come around to seeing that nobody profits by the mullahs being in charge in Iran, that if that regime could fall, it's not just good for Israel or the U.S., it's good for Iran?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that has to be a part of the conversation of regime change. I think the United States government, going back to the first Trump administration, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, made very clear our issue is not with the Iranian people. Mm-hmm. It is with this regime that is using that country as a launch pad for its attacks on Israel and other peace-loving countries. So I do think that you have to eliminate the threat in terms of their nuclear capabilities, mm-hmm. But then I think also a regime change is in order.
Now, let's say that happens. In a world where Donald Trump is back, the Abraham Accords might bring in Saudi Arabia pretty soon. Imagine if Iran went back to being a peaceful country. Could you see that this region could actually maybe find a day of peace with pretty much everybody? You know, the Iranian people, which used to be good friends with Israel, the Saudis. Could you see a day where there could actually be peace in this most volatile region?
I think that we can have a managed peace in this region. I would say that you can never take your eye off of Turkey. I personally, as I've tracked Turkey and President Erdogan there and his goal of reestablishing a Islamic caliphate, mm-hmm. that you cannot for one moment close your eyes to the north, mm-hmm. And what might be coming from there someday.
Yeah, and what's interesting now is we're seeing this big buildup of the Egyptian military in the Sinai. I imagine, okay, so maybe Turkey wants the Ottoman Empire back. Do you think there's a chance that maybe the Egyptians would like to see the Pharaoh days coming back?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as concerned because Egypt has El-Sisi's actually shown himself to be a pretty good partner. I've met with him a couple of times. Also, he has a very fragile government, and the whole society there is just, I don't think they could sustain something like that. Yeah. Where Turkey has one of the largest militaries in the region, it is also, unfortunately, a member from, of course, I speak as a public policy leader, as a Christian, not for the administration. I'm not involved in the Trump administration, but I think it's shameful they're a part of NATO. Yeah. They are certainly not a good partner with the NATO countries, and I do think they are one of the greatest risks in the region.
I have to agree with you. Well, thank you so much, Tony Perkins, Family Research Council. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be with you.
In addition to wars and rumors of wars, there's another event happening in Israel that's not getting a lot of press, but it's affecting everyone's quality of life for the better. Spring has arrived, and the reason we know for sure is because of one special blossom. When it appears every year, it lifts the hearts and points to an encouraging scripture from the book of Jeremiah. And I'm standing next to an almond tree. And that's because almond trees are the first trees that bloom, or one of the first trees that bloom after the winter. So it's a sign that spring is coming. Now we read about the shaked, the almond, in the book of Jeremiah. Asked Jeremiah in verse 11, Jeremiah, what do you see? And I said, I see a branch of an almond tree. Then the Lord said to me, you have seen well, or I am watching over to perform my word. Now, what's the connection between those two things? Well, a shaked, almond, that Jeremiah talked about, is related to the word shoked, which is what God says he's doing to his word. He's watching over it. So it's like a watchman. And that's the sign of the almond blossom, that it comes right after winter. So we know the spring is coming. And just like God fulfills his word, like when it's winter and we think it's not going to come, spring will never come, God is watching over his word to perform it. That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And please keep praying for the protection and peace of Jerusalem, that no weapon formed against Israel would prosper. Remember, the God who watches over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. For all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.